Hi everyone, it's William with the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series, and I didn't have a chance to do a video yesterday, so it's now the 9th. I skipped the 8th, so the last one was on the 7th, but that's all right because we are discussing a completely different topic today in this section of the long diary entry of 15th April 1921. A recap. Well, it was about the strike, the coal miners' strike in England, and Black Friday, when two of the other big unions declined to support the coal miners, and Dmitri was then expressing his antipathy and the antipathy that was felt amongst many Russian emigres about the attitude that the British had toward Russia and Russians. They perceived it as very offensive and somewhat arrogant, and they still saw Britain as a possible geopolitical rival in the future if this little Bolshevik problem were to somehow disappear, and there would be a return to the great game, the rivalry between Britain and Russia. So that was yesterday's little section, and today we're on to this will be the last video for the long diary entry of the 15th, so not as long as a lot of the long diary entries because we're only up to part 6. I need to break this habit of always turning my profile. I'm looking at my laptop in case you're curious why that is. How can I arrange that? Let's see. All right, anyway, today's topic is the ongoing saga of General Pyotr Wrangel, who'd been the last of the white generals to hold out in Russia, and his army, Wrangel's army, had been evacuated from the Crimea to Constantinople, and their stay in Constantinople was, well, it was just no longer tenable for them to be there, for them to have settled there. But before we get into that, I just want to say maybe it will enhance your enjoyment or your interest in this particular section of the diary if you keep one thing in mind, and it's the thing that really just sprung to my mind while I was reading and translating this, is how much what Dmitri is saying about Wrangel and about the refugees and the desire to form a government in Constantinople and to establish leadership, how much of what he's saying in a very disapproving, even disparaging way, although in a lot of ways not unreasonably, very much not unreasonably, if what he's saying is accurate, so much of it could be applied directly to the monarchist movement in exile and to the idea of having someone like himself or Kirill establish the leadership of that community. So in that sense, he's being a little hypocritical, although not as much as he would have been several months before when he was still thinking of himself as the potential leader of Russia in the future and leader of emigres, and now he's no longer thinking about that for himself. But Kirill, he will be joining up with Kirill when I think beginning in 1923, even though he didn't like Kirill, and going along with this idea of having an emperor in exile, waiting to go back to Russia. And so what he's saying here about Wrangel's movement is exactly what I would say about the monarchist movement, both then and now, insofar as it still is ongoing and there's still, a sort of self-declared empress in exile, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I think that's something interesting to keep in mind. I'm doing this, it's several paragraphs, but I decided to do it all at once because it is sort of a self-contained topic, that not what Dmitri discussed before and not what he's discussing in the videos to follow immediately upon this one. So I thought if I could do it all in one, it would make sense to do it all in one. So bear with me with this. I've already been yakking for 5 minutes, but it's very interesting material, I think. So our cast today, only one individual person aside from Dmitri himself, and that is Baron Pyotr Wrangel. All right, here we go. A great deal is also being written in the newspapers about Wrangel. Incidentally, he has set up some new council in Constantinople and is trying to invest it with political significance and claim the rights of some non-existent government. I know very little about it, but as far as I can tell from the newspapers, the whole thing is simply laughable. On the one hand, the French are demanding the immediate liquidation of Wrangel's army, and on the other hand, Peter is busy forming some kind of government, which, as far as I can tell, is supposed to take authority over the entire emigre diaspora. The whole thing is ridiculous, sad, and stupid. One thing is clear, and that's that Wrangel wants to keep the prerogatives of supreme ruler for himself, but that role would be like something out of an operetta under current circumstances, because to be a ruler without subjects and far removed from the motherland is simply stupid and absurd. Okay, I'm going to interject here because this is just so much a description of the monarchist movement that I wonder, maybe it's subconscious on Dmitri's part, and this sort of resentment and disparagement of Wrangel as wanting to be the authority. Yeah, it strikes me that way. Okay, we resume. With respect to the liquidation of the army, Wrangel has apparently entered a phase of extremely strained relations with the French government, and one can now expect all kinds of unpleasant surprises from that quarter, including his forced expulsion from Constantinople. In my opinion, Peter is making a terrible mistake in not wanting voluntarily to accept the status of a refugee and give up all political power except what he needs to retain in order to liquidate his army. It would be so much more dignified and decent than clinging to the pitiful and ephemeral scraps of some other kind of authority, as he is doing now. But it's frightfully difficult to judge all of this from a distance. We'll see what I find out about it in Paris. But it's terribly damaging to Russian self-esteem. By bucking and clinging to power, Wrangel is only turning himself into a character from an operetta, which is such a tragic ending to the volunteer army's epic abroad. It's just frightful to think about the horror that must reign among the Russians in Constantinople. My hair just stands on end when I'm reminded of the torments that all these unfortunate Russian people must be experiencing. And now, as always, I'll undertake a description of how I spent each day over the course of the past 2 weeks. So he's so right about in that last paragraph. So this, as I've said in the past, is sort of my Bible on Russian emigre matters in France, or in the sort of orbit of France. Alexander Zhivakov's Les Russes Blancs. I never know how to pronounce things in French. Probably Les Russes Blancs. Anyway, if you read French, or even if you can just you know, photograph pages and run them through a translation program. It's such a good book. And Zhivakov talks at length about what was going on in Constantinople and with Wrangel, and that's how I found out just how dire things were for those poor people. Nobody wanted them. No country wanted them. And so they had to scramble to find any place where they could go and find employment and just, be able to live their lives. All right, so as I said, I don't really know, and Dmitri doesn't know, and he admits that, quite frankly. It's difficult to judge all this from a distance, and I'll have to wait and see what I find out about it in Paris. But as far as what he's talking about, the French saying that they weren't going to support Wrangel or his army anymore, and that the Turks didn't want them in Constantinople or Istanbul anymore, all of that is absolutely true. What I would quibble with a little bit is his characterization of Wrangel, because I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's true that Wrangel was trying to establish a government, that he was trying to hold on to power, and that might have been a little bit, maybe it's true, but it also might have been some projection on Dmitri's part. Yeah, so I just don't know if the man was power hungry or an admirable figure. Kind of seems like the latter, because of what he was, trying to make sure that the people evacuated to Constantinople had a chance in life. But I don't know if he was trying to form a government. And yeah. As for Dmitri, we could criticize him and say, well, why aren't you doing anything? Why aren't you in Constantinople meeting with these people and talking to these people and trying to help them? And the fact of the matter is, I find it hard to criticize Dmitri in that respect. I think I have in the past, I think it would have been smart for him, even if he no longer thought about being, the Tsar in exile. It would have been smart for him to establish his leadership role through going into Constantinople, through being there for the refugees. But the fact of the matter is, I just don't know that he had it in him. He was so much given to depression. According to Coco, he was a shy person, and he really just wasn't a leader. He just wasn't. He was very smart man. And I think quite reasonable, usually, in the way he looks at things, and even admirable in the way he looks at things and the way he assesses things. But not everybody has it in them to be a leader. And the Romanov men, very often, including Nicholas II, had that. They were known to be kind of these, sort of dreamy, introspective, and yeah, and that was a trait that several of them had. And, it is what it is. I'm not doing anything as far as we have refugee crises in the world just now. And some of them involving my country that I think right now has a shameful attitude toward refugees. I'm not doing a damn thing. So it's hard for me to criticize Dmitri in that respect. But I certainly think he's sincere in what he's saying about how when he thinks about it, it makes his hair stand on end, and he realizes how horrible it is. It's just, given the struggles that he had with depression, he had to try not to. That was a survival strategy, to try not to think about things like this. Okay, so what do we have next time? Well, we have a real doozy of a diary entry next time. So a long one, a short diary entry in terms of it's one that covers a single day and not a big topic like these. But we get more about the nature of his relationship with Coco and some of the ways in which it's less than ideal. And, you know, it's an introspective diary entry. He addresses this whole thing about not doing anything in Monte Carlo, kind of just being there like a retiree who does the same thing every day. And he talks about that and why that's the case. Okay, and I forgot. I wanted to say just a little bit more about Wrangel, that in 1922, so, you know, a year or less from the time that Dmitri is writing this in his diary, he will be going to Serbia, or what was called at that time, I think, the Kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, so Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, and he would be taking as many white Russian refugees as he could with him there, and still sort of being their leader. In 1924, also in Serbia, he would establish something called the Russian All-Military Union, which, so this is Wikipedia. I didn't go out of my way to do research. It was kind of a busy weekend, and so, you know, I fell back on Wikipedia. Sorry. Anyway, it's probably good information. So the Russian All-Military Union is a civilian organization that was designed to embrace all Russian military emigres all over the world. So this is where, you know, this sort of corroborates what Dmitri's saying, that Wrangel had this ambition or pretension, or however you want to say it, of being the leader of the whole emigre diaspora. Okay, so there's a point for Dmitri on that one. And he tried to preserve a military organization for another fight against Bolshevism. That's a quote from the Wikipedia entry. In 1927, he and his family ended up emigrating to Belgium, to Brussels, where he worked as a mining engineer, and that was actually his background. Funnily enough, he did not have a background in the military. His background was as an engineer, and then, of course, circumstances ended up thrusting this role upon him, and he turned out to be really, really good at it. But then in Belgium, he went back to being a mining engineer. And there are memoirs. So he published his memoirs in an emigre magazine or journal called Белое дело, The White Cause. It was in Berlin. It was in 1928. I have not looked at that. I need to try and find that. Anyway, it doesn't say here what language, but since it was a Russian journal, probably in Russian. So I will stop. Do come back for a resumption. Some of the most interesting stuff about Dmitri's relationship with Coco comes in this next section, in the daily diary entries. So they're the complete opposite of these very short, laconic daily diary entries that we've already had. So if you're interested in that relationship, you'll definitely want to come back for that. And I hope to see you next time. Okay, take care. Bye.